So today I'm going to move on to scene two. Scene two is a direct pickup from where we left off at the end of Act One, where Catherine drops the bombshell of her revelation. And in this scene, um, we take a look at the reactions of all three characters, where on the one hand we have Claire and Hal, who are in disbelief, and their disbelief is motivated rather by their very practical and logical outlook of things. And on the other hand, we have Catherine, who's completely emotional, and she is, really hurt by the lack of trust from both her sister and this guy that she's gotten really fond of. So we'll start off by looking at Claire, right? On pages 60 to 61, you can read for yourself. I've underlined it on the photocopied version that I gave out to you, the details of her interrogation. But the most significant line in her interrogation will be this, where she says, "I'm sorry, but I just find this very hard to believe." So when someone says that they find it very hard to believe, as opposed to "I do not believe," it means that that person has a natural instinct or a gut feeling of wanting to believe, but they're resisting it. So, why do you think Claire is resisting, right? Wanting to believe Catherine? I think obviously um, the first reason will be she doubts her ability. I mean, Catherine has not been to school in many years. She's been cooped up at home, and no one really knows the extent of her talent before this. Secondly, and more importantly, it's about how Claire is afraid. She's afraid that if Catherine is indeed this talented, then does it not also mean that she could be just as vulnerable to the madness that came along with her father's gift of genius, right? And what would this mean if Catherine is indeed proven to be a genius who is just as susceptible to madness? Is she going to turn out to be a second burden that Claire will now have to shoulder all alone? Okay, so I think Claire's disbelief is based on a lot of her fear for wanting to find out the truth about whether Catherine is really a genius or not, and whether her genius is accompanied with madness. Okay, so moving on to Hal. Um, Hal's initial reaction is one where he doesn't really want to give a direct answer, right? He doesn't quite take Claire's side, but at the same time, he doesn't want to hurt Catherine by disbelieving her. Okay, so his first response is quite a hedge where he says, "I don't know what a writing looks like." But I think what's most significant in what he says is on page 62, where he says, "I'm just saying there's no proof that you wrote this." So Hal is just as practical and logical as Claire is trying to be, but his motivations are quite different. He is not afraid of Catherine's genius or lack thereof. He is just a typical mathematician who cannot decide on anything unless there is clear proof for him to do so. And you can imagine how this goes over where Catherine is concerned, because she chose to trust him because she likes him, she's fond of him, they just had a really intimate night together. She's been alone for so long, there's been no other person in her life. And here he is saying, just no proof. I mean, he doesn't want to trust her or take her feelings into account. So Catherine's reaction. My question is, whose disbelief do you think hurt her more? Do you think it was Claire's disbelief, or do you think it was Hal's disbelief? So let's look at Claire's disbelief. Catherine reacts to Claire's disbelief by saying, "I don't know why I expected you to believe me about anything." And I think her reaction comes from the fact that Claire, after all, abandoned her father and her for so long, and simply provided money all the way from New York while she was living her life and getting engaged and making preparations for her wedding, right? While Catherine was stuck in Chicago alone with her father. So there's already this inherent sense of um, this lack of trust between the two sisters, where Catherine feels Claire has let her down, and where Claire feels Catherine might be just as mad as her father. Okay, but where Hal is concerned, Catherine says, I didn't show this to anyone else. It's me. I trusted you. So I think she's a lot more hurt by his betrayal because where he is concerned, she made a conscious choice to give him the key. He was the first guy she's come into contact with, and there was this chemistry between them, and they could, they had a great conversation, they had a great night, and she wanted to share, right? She wanted to share her incredible work with someone, and she chose to trust him. And yet he completely lets her down, and he takes this rather cold hearted approach of saying, I need proof. The last two pages of this particular scene, which is on pages 64 and 65, is quite interesting because from the conversation between Hal and Catherine, David Auburn actually makes us think a little bit more about this contrast, this dichotomy between proof versus trust, right? So Hal justifies his reaction by saying, I'm a mathematician. So he's kind of saying, look, what more do you expect of me? This is who I am, this is how I think. I need proof, right? I need a clear sense of cause and effect. I need to see a logical sequence to events. And Catherine rebuts him by saying, I'm a mathematician too. So between Hal and Catherine, if we look at the situation, he claims he's the mathematician, but she's the one who's, produced an incredible work of maths over here. And yet, she's telling him, I put everything on the line, I took a risk, I chose to trust you, but that doesn't make me any less of a mathematician than you are. And he's saying, I'm a mathematician, you can't expect me to react with trust and emotions, I need proof. So there's this contrast, I mean, in the end, what defines a mathematician? Is a mathematician always supposed to be someone who reacts with logical reasoning? Or can a mathematician be like Catherine, where, you know, there's also an element of emotional vulnerability to them? So, the other thing is, we can see how Hal's hero worshipping of Robert has really affected his judgment. To him, Robert was the best. There can be no one else like him. In fact, Hal says on page 64, my generation hasn't produced anything like him. He revolutionized the field twice before he was 22. And I'm sorry, Catherine, but you just took some classes at Northwestern for a few months, right? So he just simply cannot fathom the idea that someone can be just as talented as Robert, or even more so, and that someone is a girl who didn't even pursue a proper degree, right? And Catherine's um, retort to his skepticism is that it's just too advanced for you. So she says it's not that you don't believe me or you don't see this thing as working out, but it's because when you look at it, you don't even understand it, and that's because it's just too advanced for you. And I think when she says this, she really hurts him because she goes on to lash out and she says it would be a real disaster for you, wouldn't it? And for all the other geeks who barely finished their PhDs. So because she's so hurt, she lashes out at him, and we can see how he hesitates and then he abruptly exits the scene. Because I think it's true. I think on some level, I mean, it's probably difficult for him to swallow that someone like her, who didn't go to school, who's a girl, could possibly be this very talented, right? And the final the final conclusion of this scene, we see how Catherine tries to rip out the pages. And I think why she tries to do this is because I think she's really got to a point where she just hates this whole thing. She just hates her mathematical genius or talent and whatever it is. I mean, it has cost her so much. It cost her her freedom, her social life. She had to look after her father, who was half mad all the time. And now it has again hurt her because she was hopeful for a new start, a new relationship. And yet again, it's come back and bitten her because it just didn't work out. Okay, so I think she's really at the end of her line where Max is concerned and she tries to rip out the pages. Okay, so that's the end of this particular scene, and I'm going to end it here.